When my apartment building announced emergency repairs that would last a few weeks, maybe more, I had two options: spend a fortune on a hotel or crash somewhere less expensive. That's when my mom suggested I call Rachel. Rachel had been around for as long as I could remember. Technically not related to me, but always referred to as Aunt Rachel. She was my mom's best friend from college and had lived 2 towns over ever since her divorce. I'd spent some holidays at her place growing up, especially when Mom had to travel. She was always cool, artsy, funny, a little intense sometimes, but easy to be around. And when I texted her to ask if I could stay a while, her reply came almost instantly. Of course, you know the guest room's yours anytime. So I packed a bag, grabbed my laptop, and drove down on a Sunday afternoon, expecting a quiet few weeks. I wasn't expecting to feel like I had walked into a different universe. Her house looked the same from the outside, modest, neat, the porch still framed by hanging ivy and a wind chime that clinked in the breeze. But the moment she opened the door, I noticed it. Something subtle. Rachel looked different. Still the same warm smile. Still barefoot as always. But her hair, normally pinned up or messy, was down around her shoulders in soft waves. She wore a fitted tank top and linen pants that hung loosely off one hip, and her skin had that glow like she'd just come in from the sun. I must have stared a second too long because she laughed. "You gonna come in or just stand there with your mouth open?" I smiled, suddenly aware of myself. "Sorry. Long drive." She pulled me into a hug that lingered maybe a second longer than it needed to, then led me inside. The house smelled like cinnamon and something floral. Same couch, same kitchen layout, same art on the walls. But everything felt warmer, lived in, intimate. I dropped my bag in the guest room, right across the hall from hers, and we spent the evening catching up over takeout and wine. She asked about school, my job, whether I was still playing guitar. I wasn't. I asked about her gallery, her new yoga routine, the plants she kept naming like children. And then there were the little things I started noticing, like the way she'd look at me when I wasn't speaking, not just listening, but watching, or how she'd lean against the counter when we talked, her shirt hanging loose at the neck, revealing just enough to make me look away too quickly. That night, lying in the guest bed with the ceiling fan spinning lazily above, I couldn't sleep. Not because the bed was unfamiliar, it wasn't. I'd stayed here before, but because everything else was. Rachel wasn't acting strange, exactly. She wasn't being flirty or inappropriate. But something had shifted. Maybe in her, maybe in me, or maybe in both of us. The next morning didn't help. I woke to the smell of coffee and heard soft music playing from the kitchen. I found her there in an oversized shirt and shorts, one leg curled beneath her as she scrolled through her phone. She looked up when I walked in and smiled. "Sleep okay?" I nodded, grabbing a mug. "Yeah. Thanks again for letting me stay." She waved it off. "I like having you here. It's been a while since the house had any real company." We fell into a rhythm over the next few days. I worked remotely from the kitchen table, helped her water the garden, cooked dinner once or twice. It all felt normal, almost. But then there were those moments, like when I walked into the hallway and caught her in the middle of changing, shirt lifted, bare back exposed. She didn't rush to cover herself, just turned slightly, smiled faintly and said, "Oops, didn't hear you coming." Or when I reached above her to grab a glass and felt her body lean back just enough to brush mine. And always the looks, those long, quiet glances that said everything and nothing. One evening, after dinner, we were sitting on the couch watching a movie. She had her feet tucked under her, one arm draped over the back cushion. I shifted slightly, and her foot brushed against my leg. She didn't move it. Neither did I. We didn't speak. We didn't look at each other, but my skin burned where she touched me. Later that night, in my bedroom, I sat on the edge of the bed staring at the floor, heart thudding for reasons I didn't want to name. I told myself I was overthinking it, that Rachel was just being Rachel. But that didn't explain the feeling in my chest. Didn't explain the heat that lingered every time she passed too close. Didn't explain why I'd started sleeping with the door closed, even though I never used to. I lay down, turned off the light, and stared at the ceiling fan until the room blurred. Outside my door, I heard her walk past, soft steps on the hardwood floor. She paused, just for a moment, and then kept going. I didn't know what that meant, but I knew this. Whatever was happening between us, it wasn't all in my head. The heat that week was relentless. Every morning began with the sound of cicadas and the distant hum of lawnmowers. The sun baked the front steps by 10, and by noon, every surface inside the house seemed to hold a little too much warmth. Rachel kept the curtains drawn and the ceiling fans going, but the air always felt thick, like it was holding something. So did I. It was subtle at first, small moments that built slowly. She'd pass behind me while I worked at the table and her hand would brush my shoulder. She'd stand beside me while I chopped vegetables, our arms almost touching, and she wouldn't step away. Sometimes, she'd talk to me while tying her hair up, and I'd find myself watching her fingers. Graceful, practiced, intimate in a way I hadn't noticed before. And then there were the clothes. Around the house, she was always barefoot, always casual. Loose tops, soft shorts, tank tops that clung in the humidity. Nothing provocative, nothing loud. But everything she wore seemed to ask for attention by not asking at all. I tried not to think too much. Told myself it was the heat, the stillness, the boredom. But that excuse didn't hold up. The afternoon I found her in the laundry room, bent over the dryer, tugging out a bundle of towels. Her shirt had ridden up slightly, exposing the soft curve of her lower back. I froze in the doorway without meaning to, and she must have heard me because she turned and smiled, like she already knew I'd been watching. "You scared me," she said, brushing a loose strand of hair behind her ear. "Can you grab the fabric softener? Top shelf." I did as she asked, my fingers brushing hers as I handed it over. She didn't flinch, just looked up and held my gaze a second longer than necessary. "Thanks," she said quietly. That night, dinner was quieter than usual. No background music, no TV, just her, slicing roasted vegetables, her skin still warm from the evening sun. She poured us both glasses of white wine without asking and nudged mine toward me with her knuckle. We talked, but I couldn't tell you about what. I was too focused on the way her collarbone shifted as she moved, the way the sweat at her temple made a strand of hair cling to her cheek. After dinner, I went to my room early. I didn't know why. Maybe I needed space. Maybe I needed to stop thinking. The blinds were closed, the fan spinning. I lay on the bed shirtless, scrolling on my phone with the lights off, letting the hum of the room blur everything. And then I heard the sound of the shower turning off. The bathroom was across the hall. My door was open a crack, just enough to catch a glimpse of warm hallway light. I heard the door open, the sound of bare feet on the hardwood, slow, casual steps, and then my door creaked. I looked up. She stepped inside. Rachel stood in the doorway, wrapped in a soft white towel, her hair damp and curling near her shoulders. Her skin glistened faintly from the steam, and her eyes held something unreadable, calm, but focused. Not a trace of panic, not a hint of hesitation. I sat up slowly. "Hey," I said, barely above a whisper. She didn't speak right away. She walked in a few steps, then paused near the edge of the bed, adjusting the towel slightly at her chest. "Sorry to just barge in," she said softly. I know you're probably winding down. It's fine, I said. Is everything okay? She nodded, her voice quieter now. I just… She hesitated, then turned her back to me slightly, lifting her hair off her neck. I have this knot in my shoulder. Right side. It's been bugging me all day. I froze. She looked over her shoulder at me. Would you mind? Mind what? Just rubbing it a little. Nothing weird. I can't reach it. The room tilted. I swallowed. My throat felt dry. Sure. Yeah. She sat down on the edge of the bed, facing away from me, the towel tucked tight under her arms. Her back was bare from the shoulder blades up, and droplets of water still clung to her skin. I shifted behind her and lifted my hands, hovering for a second before touching her. My fingers found the space beneath her neck, slow, cautious. Her skin was warm, soft, real. She sighed at the first touch, and the sound did something to my chest. I moved my fingers gently across her shoulder blade, pressing into the muscles, unsure if I was doing it right. There, she said, voice low. A little lower. I followed her instructions. Her breath caught slightly. You're good at this, she murmured. I didn't respond. Couldn't. I kept my hands moving, slow circles, gentle pressure. Her skin shifted under my palms. Her head tilted slightly forward, exposing more of her neck. The room was silent except for the fan and the sound of my breathing. She turned her head just a little. Thank you, she said. Her voice was soft, measured. It's nothing, I replied, my voice barely audible. But it wasn't nothing. I felt it. So did she. She stood slowly, the towel still secure, her back to me again. I'll let you sleep, she said, walking toward the door. She didn't look back, but just before leaving, she paused. You've changed, she added, her hand resting on the doorframe. In a good way. Then she slipped out into the hallway, and the door clicked gently shut behind her. I sat there for a long time. The room felt too quiet. My hands still tingled from where they had touched her. That wasn't an accident. That wasn't a casual favor. And I wasn't imagining this anymore. I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her, Rachel, seated in front of me in that towel, her back bare, her skin damp beneath my hands, the shape of her shoulder blade, the way she tilted her head when I touched just the right spot, the quiet sigh that left her mouth. None of it was graphic, none of it explicit, but it felt like more than anything I'd experienced. I kept going over it again and again in my mind. The way she entered the room, the way she asked, the way she left without ever looking flustered. It was like she had been in control the whole time, while I just sat there frozen, 23 years old, and completely unprepared for whatever this was. And I didn't even know what this was. The next morning, I half expected things to feel awkward, to feel off. But when I walked into the kitchen, she was already there, back to me, flipping something in a pan. She wore a robe now, loose and cinched at the waist, her hair still slightly damp, tied in a loose bun. Morning, she said without turning. Hey, I replied, trying to sound casual. She glanced at me over her shoulder, smiling slightly. Hungry, starving. We ate quietly. Nothing in her behavior suggested anything unusual. No side glances, no tension in her shoulders. She talked about needing to go to the hardware store later, about how the lemon tree in the backyard wasn't fruiting, about the new yoga instructor she wasn't sure she liked. I answered. I nodded. But my brain was somewhere else entirely. I kept hearing her voice from the night before. You've changed. In a good way. The words sat like a pebble in my shoe all day. In the afternoon, she asked if I'd help her move some boxes from the garage into the storage closet at the back of the house. I said sure. Anything to keep moving. Anything to avoid being alone in a room with her again. The boxes were heavier than I expected. Old books, holiday decorations, and used dishes. I stacked them as best I could, trying to focus on the task. She came in behind me, holding a smaller box against her hip. She bent down to set it on the floor, and the knot of her robe loosened just slightly. I looked away instantly, pretending to adjust the stack on the shelf. But I could still feel the warmth of her body nearby. I could smell the faint scent of her shampoo. And then I felt her hand on my back. Just a touch. Just a palm pressed lightly between my shoulders. "You okay?" she asked softly. I nodded, not turning. "Yeah, just hot in here." She said nothing for a second, then gave a light, almost playful pat on my back and walked out. I stayed in that closet a minute longer than I needed to, staring at the boxes, trying to calm the thudding in my chest. That evening, the sky turned gray, and soft thunder rolled in the distance. The air smelled like wet pavement and something else, jasmine maybe, from the backyard. We made dinner together, pasta and grilled vegetables. Rachel poured 2 glasses of wine again and sat across from me, one leg tucked up under her. The candle on the table flickered. The light was low. The room felt enclosed. We talked, laughed, ate, and when we finished, she didn't get up right away. Instead, she swirled her wine slowly and looked at me with that same calm gaze from the night before. "You've been quiet today. Just tired." I lied. She nodded, watching me for a second longer than necessary. "You sure?" I met her eyes, and for a moment, neither of us looked away. "I'm sure," I said. She smiled faintly, then stood. "I'm gonna go rinse off," she said. "It's so muggy I feel sticky just from sitting." I nodded, not trusting my voice. She paused before leaving the kitchen. "You can put on something to watch if you want. I'll be out soon." I turned on a movie, some old romantic drama neither of us really cared about, and sat on the couch trying to pretend I was focused. But I wasn't. I was listening, for the shower, for the footsteps, for the door. And sure enough, 15 minutes later, I heard the soft thud of the bathroom door opening. The hallway light flicked on. I didn't look, couldn't. Then she entered. But this time she was dressed. Not fully, but differently. She wore one of those long, loose sweaters that fell just to mid-thigh. Her hair was wet, framing her face. Her legs were bare, and her feet made soft sounds against the hardwood as she approached. "That the movie you picked?" she asked, settling beside me. "Yeah. Not sure if it's good." "Doesn't matter," she said. "I'm not watching it for the plot." I turned my head toward her. She was smiling, but not in a teasing way. Just quietly. We sat in silence for a while. The movie played, but we barely watched. At one point, she shifted, pulling the edge of the sweater tighter around her. Her leg brushed mine. She didn't move it. Neither did I. Then, without looking at me, she said, "About last night." My throat tightened. "Yeah." She was quiet for a second. Then, "Thanks. It really helped." "Of course." She finally looked at me. Her eyes were soft, serious. "It wasn't weird for you, was it?" I shook my head slowly. "No, not weird." A beat passed. "Okay," she said, almost in a whisper. She turned back to the screen, but her hand had moved closer to mine on the couch. I felt her pinky brush against me, light, barely there, but it stayed. And then she spoke again, quietly, almost like she wasn't sure I was meant to hear it. "You're not a kid anymore." I turned my head, heart hammering. She didn't look at me, but she knew I'd heard. She stood slowly, pulling her sweater down as she walked. "I'm going to bed." she said without turning. Night. Good night, I whispered. She didn't close the door all the way behind her. And I sat there, alone, in a house that no longer felt the same. I didn't move for a long time. The movie kept playing, forgotten. The screen flickered quietly in front of me while my thoughts twisted into something I couldn't untangle. Her words echoed in my head. You're not a kid anymore. Not a compliment. Not a tease. Just a statement. True. Obvious. And yet it felt like a door creaking open in a room I hadn't dared explore. That night I didn't sleep. Not really. I lay in bed, listening, to the house settling, to the wind brushing against the windows, to the silence just beyond the wall between my room and hers. At some point I heard her shift in bed, a creak of springs, a soft sigh, and then nothing. The next morning, I woke to the smell of toast and coffee. The sun was brighter than usual, leaking through the edges of the blinds in clean gold lines. I got up, pulled on a t-shirt, and walked barefoot into the kitchen. She was there, of course. Rachel stood at the stove in that same oversized sweater from the night before, except now it hung off one shoulder. Her hair was in a lazy bun, a few damp strands falling loose. She looked like someone who had just woken from the kind of sleep that leaves you thoughtful. She turned when she heard me. Morning. Hey. She handed me a mug without asking. Still black. Still hot. We moved around each other like we'd done it 1,000 times before. The clink of plates. The scrape of a chair. We sat across from each other, toast between us, neither of us saying much. But it wasn't uncomfortable. It was aware. Every glance carried a second layer. Every movement meant something else. Plans today? She asked. Thought I'd run a few errands. Maybe grab groceries. I could use a few things, she said, sipping her coffee. Mind if I tag along? Not at all. We went to the market together. Drove with the windows down. Talked about nothing important, weather, music, what kind of bread was overpriced. But between the lines, something simmered. There was a moment in the produce aisle when she reached past me for a lemon, and her chest brushed my arm. She didn't apologize, and I didn't move away. Later, in the car, with the bags in the back seat and music playing low, she turned to me at a red light. You've been acting different, she said. How so? She thought for a second, then said, like you're waiting for something. The light turned green. I didn't respond. When we got back to the house, she walked ahead with the keys in her hand. She opened the door, stepped inside, then paused and looked back at me before disappearing into the hallway. I followed slower, heart tight in my chest. By the time I'd put the bags down, she'd already changed into a sleeveless tank top and soft joggers. Her hair was down now, framing her face in loose waves. She didn't look at me when she passed through the living room, just said, "Come help me in the laundry room when you're done." I did. There was a high shelf she couldn't reach, something about boxes of old towels. I climbed onto the stool and grabbed one, but as I stepped down, I stumbled slightly, and she caught me. Her hands landed on my waist, firm, steady. Our faces were close, too close, and for a second, neither of us moved. I looked at her. She looked at me. Her hands didn't drop, and mine didn't shake. Thanks, I said, my voice low. She didn't respond, just searched my face. Then, slowly, she stepped back, her fingers trailing away. You've really grown up, she said softly. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. That night, we didn't sit on opposite ends of the couch. We sat closer, not touching, but close enough that I could feel her breath when she leaned over to hand me tea. Close enough that our knees brushed once, then stayed that way. The lights were low, the windows open, the air thick and slow. At one point, She turned slightly toward me and said, I keep thinking about that night. I looked at her. Which one? She smiled faintly. The back rub. My throat tightened. Yeah. She nodded. Her voice was quieter now. It was a little selfish of me, wasn't it? I didn't mind. A beat. She exhaled slowly. I know you didn't. There it was again. That line between us. Invisible, electric, vibrating. And this time I didn't pretend not to see it. You didn't come in by accident, did you? I asked. She didn't flinch. No. Silence. But it wasn't awkward. It was filled with everything we weren't saying. Then she said, almost too softly to hear, I think I just wanted to feel seen. And you? She stopped. Me? Her eyes met mine. You looked at me like I was still someone. I swallowed hard. You are. She smiled. Not playful. Not seductive. Just real. I'm going to bed, she said. She stood. But before she walked away, she added, I'm leaving the door open. I didn't say anything. Didn't have to. Because in that moment, I understood something I hadn't until now. This wasn't a mistake. This wasn't about a back rub, or a towel, or a glance. This was about two people grown, aware, and quiet for far too long, meeting in the space between memory and desire. I watched her disappear down the hall. And for the first time since I'd arrived, I followed.